Hi, and welcome to The Signal. I'm Terry Rice, and today we're chatting with Codie Sanchez. Codie does a lot. She is the founder and CEO of Contrarian Thinking, which is a financial advice enterprise with close to 3 million subscribers. She's also the co-founder of Unconventional Acquisitions, which is focused on small business acquisitions for the everyman, and is the author of Main Street Millionaire, which we'll get into later on today as well. Hey, Codie, how are you today?
So good. Thanks for having me here, Terry.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here, and I have a somewhat unusual question I'm going to start with. I'm wondering if you do CrossFit. It's because I saw this video of you doing a handstand walk, and I'm like, all right, she might be part of the tribe. So do you do CrossFit, or are you just really good at doing a handstand walks?
No, I do. I lift weights. I don't do CrossFit especially, but my trainer is a badass in CrossFit. Her name's Claire Bays. And so she teaches me these random CrossFit things. But I'm always too much of a wuss to go out there and like go head to head with a bunch of people. So I just train individually with her, and then she teaches me handstands and crazy, pull-ups and all that jazz.
Yeah, I mean, that's a more advanced move. So if you can do that, you can hang. I'll just put that out there. But I'm curious, what role do you think fitness plays in your success as an entrepreneur?
I think it's hard to have a strong mind if you don't have a strong body, and that sounds like a cliche, except that it's true. And so we have a creed at Contrarian Thinking, which is civilize the mind, make savage the body, and build the bank account. And I think those 3 things done in tandem are what lead to a successful life. I mean, the second that you get sick, none of the money in the world really matters, right? If you don't have your health, it doesn't matter, and you go a lot farther and you go a lot faster when you have more energy. And so I'm pretty aggressive about making sure that we are doing things to make our bodies just as strong as our minds. I also have found that I'm married to a former Navy SEAL, and so he's a badass and is really good at all of this stuff. But I've found that when you surround yourself with other people who take their body seriously, they are often pretty successful too. I think I've never really met somebody who has 6-pack abs, is in incredible shape, is also healthy, like with what they eat and put in their body. It's not just aesthetically for show, and doesn't have a large degree of discipline, which is what you need to be successful. And so I think if you can't figure out how to build the bank account, you can always start with building some biceps.
That's a bar. Thanks for that. So yeah, and there's another quote, like, if you can't make time for your fitness, you'll have to make time to deal with your illness. So I'm with you there, and we're aligned. But let's go deeper into successful people, because I saw that on your LinkedIn, I believe it was, you did a recap of 10 lessons you learned from wildly successful people, which came from your podcast, The Big Deal. So can you share one of your favorite lessons that you got from this podcast?
Yeah, well, the cool part about a podcast is you get to ask inappropriate questions to some of your richest, most successful friends, and it's like, okay.
Great, so game on. I'm going to start asking.
Exactly. That's the benefit, right? And so in this instance, this one comes from Sean Rad, and he talks about how entrepreneurship is really learning how to build a house with sticks. And I remember when he first said that to me, and it's not what you think about from a guy who's built arguably one of the most successful tech companies of our time, Tinder. And you think, no, well, he has tons of VC funds and he had all these advantages. But in the very beginning, he had one kind of small exit that allowed him to have a little bit of cash. But they were like sitting in a coffee shop trying to figure out how to build Tinder, and they were really stuck. They couldn't get anybody involved. There wasn't anything really different for it. And he was sitting in a coffee shop and kind of figured out this idea of like, wait a second, what if we swiped right and swiped left? And it all started from a tiny little stick. And then, the only reason that company I think was as successful as it was is the idea was good, but the execution was better. And so if you only knew how to, collect sticks, but you didn't know how to manufacture them and put them together and build them into something stronger, you're probably not going to win. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't spend enough time thinking not just about the idea, but how do I make sure that when the inevitable difficulty comes with the idea, I will do not what I want to do, but what is required to do.
Yeah, that foresight, I call that doing a post-mortem. So instead of a pre-mortem, like, okay, here's everything that went wrong, you think post-mortem, okay, what might go wrong and how can we build a plan around it? But in regards to Tinder, I'll tell you a quick story. I used to be a consultant, and Tinder was one of my clients. So I had to learn about the platform, and I forgot to tell my wife about that. So she's like, why do you have Tinder on your phone? And I was like, okay, let's just kind of take a step back here, and I'll walk through it. But things worked out well for them, so that's good to hear. But let's talk about Main Street Millionaire, your next book, which is coming out, I believe, December 3rd, if I'm not incorrect.
That's right. Yep.
And I'm wondering, first of all, tell us about the book. And then second of all, I'm wondering, did you learn anything new about yourself or just the business in general while you're writing it? Because sometimes when you're creating content, it's that time of reflection and all of a sudden you're like, well, a light bulb went off. So I'm just curious what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. Well, the idea of the book is simply this. If you're young in America today for the first time ever, if you're 30 years old, you are making less than your parents were when they were 30 years old on average. So we have sort of a stagnating workforce. They're not paying us more money. We've got way more expensive housing. We've got high interest rates. It's tough out there. And I think the traditional path of getting a job, sticking with a job, and growing in that job is hard. And it hasn't proven as fruitful for, our generation as I think we thought it would. And then simultaneously, we've got a generation of baby boomers that are retiring now, and they own all the businesses that are profitable and have been often for decades. And those businesses also have the ability to increase prices, which means that you can pay yourself more just in a different way than wages. And so I started thinking, maybe 3 years ago, that I should buy up these businesses. So we started doing that. I started buying a bunch of small businesses, boring businesses all over the country. And then I realized, wait a second, more people should do this. There's just too many businesses for any individual to buy. There's something like 11 million for sale right now in the US. And because of that, only one in that 11 million will sell inside of a year. And so this book is really an idea for how do we make more money doing boring things, not necessarily startup things. And then we can pile on our innovation and our startups on top of it. But if you've ever wanted to make more money, but you don't have a brilliant startup idea that's going to print capital for you, well, why don't you have both? Why don't we have businesses as bonds? And so that's the idea for this book, is why it matters, why should we be doing it right now, and then also how do we actually go out and buy businesses, because it seems perhaps to some people overwhelming, hard, like you might need to have a ton of cash, and that's just simply not the case. And so what did I learn about myself with this book? Well, I think the biggest thing I learned writing the book is if you want to talk about acquisitions, which is hard for some people to spell. There's a lot of vowels in there. It's even hard for me to spell. It's a pretty complex thing to actually do from start to finish. After teaching, 3,000 students in our community how to buy businesses, I realized that there's basically 9 core competencies you have to have in order to buy a business. You have to understand these 9 segments. And if you understand those 9 things, then I think it's really hard for you to be poor again, because you'll understand deal making, you'll understand structuring, you'll understand negotiation, you'll understand how to get money, aka financing. And so I was like, gosh, if I could recreate an MBA, it would actually be focused on M&A, because I think M&A is really the language of money. And if you can understand how a P&L works, you're way better off than if you can understand, how to balance your checking and your savings account.
Yeah, I love that. You'll never be poor again. So that's a really good incentive to buy the book, obviously. And, you talk about boring businesses, and I think part of what goes into people maybe having an aversion is their ego, right? Everyone wants this sexy app that helps you find your left shoe or something. But I know one of my friends, he got into buying vending machines, and I was like, dude, that's boring. And he's like, my vacations aren't. And I was like, that's a good point. So on your end, do you mind just sharing a few examples of what qualifies as an ordinary business and why they're so attractive as investment opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think about it this way. All the bros on Twitter love Warren Buffett, right? So they love the idea of a holding company, which is essentially just a tax structure for multiple businesses. And so if you want to go really sexy, then you build out a holding company. You build out your own empire. You build out a private equity fund. Those are some of the most sought after jobs in the world today. And oh, by the way, they make more money than anything else. And that's just levels to the game. It's like saying in the beginning, I don't want to buy a mobile home. But what really is the difference between buying a mobile home and a studio and an apartment and then a house and then multifamily and then a industrial complex? Well, the deals are actually quite similar. It's just complexity and sophistication and knowledge. And so I think we were sold a bag of goods that, what is better is some sexy startup app that could potentially make us billions. But oh, by the way, 90% of them fail. And also, most of us make no money on the come up. And then it's really miserable having to unwind those companies. In fact, we invested in a company, because I've had to unwind companies before in the VC back space, that is called Sunset. And all they do is help entrepreneurs shutter their business. We are not telling the story about how hard it actually is to build something completely innovative and unique. And I think that it's probably easier to do if you have a little cushion of money. And so, if you have that idea inside of you that you can't sleep for the want of building it, great. But like, this all too well, podcasting and books, they don't make money. They make money for Call Her Daddy and Joe Rogan. Just like celebrities at the very top make money. But, I was just talking to two celebrities on the podcast, and they were both like, you would be shocked how many A-list celebrities are broke. And we only hear about the really rich ones. And my point is, we shouldn't be. If we are making money right now, we should be owning our small communities. And then you go buy the huge baseball team, or you do something fancy like Wayne Huizenga, who's in the book. He was the founder of Waste Management, which is a garbage truck business. Wayne started driving a garbage truck. Then he bought up a couple garbage truck companies. Then he built it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Then he also owned Blockbuster, sold it, made money on Blockbuster, and then after that went on to own a bunch of sports teams, date supermodels, do all the things we want to do. And so I think my point is, people tried to tell us that something was sexy. You know what's sexy? A big bank account. Just look at how much hotter Jeff Bezos got pre-billions versus post-billions.
Yeah, he has less hair now too, but he's more sexy.
Or the CEO of Telegram, it's like fascinating. I mean, you got to work out too, but a lot of this stuff, like, I kind of think in the future, it's not very popular to say, but money cures a lot of things. Money doesn't give you happiness, but it certainly decreases misery. It certainly increases your dating pool. It certainly can help you look more attractive, both for men and women. And so I don't think we should feel bad for chasing money. And I think a lot of us are stuck in a status game. So how could I be more relevant on the internet? Well, status is actually a really low level game to play if you don't have money. Being rich and broke is much worse than being non-known and rich.
You're just saying the quiet part out loud today. All right, so let's keep digging in here, because again, like, everyone wants to have like this sexy app, so on and so forth, and they're ignoring like the laundromat around the corner, which could give them the lifestyle they're looking for. It's just a different path to the lifestyle, and I think that's the issue. It's like it's ego, ego, ego. No one wants to say they own a laundromat, but they do want to say they're doing all these cool things, and to your point, dating supermodels. So why do you think people get stuck on this? Like, what is the hesitation in regards to just investing in a more traditional business that may not be as sexy, but is a lot more sustainable, and like a lot of the hard work, which is market validation, has been done for you?
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually not so much that people don't want to own these types of businesses. I think if you went around and you told people, hey, I own a couple of car washes and that's how I make money and I'm building up my car wash empire, I think that is now slightly cooler than it used to be. Not totally cool, but I think, versus 20 years ago, people are starting to realize, oh, that's hard asset. AI can't take over that asset from me. Actually, it both increases in value over time from a real estate perspective. There's tax depreciation benefits. So I think increasingly people are realizing like, oh yeah, I would actually rather own a bunch of car lots than I would own an app and call myself founder but actually be broke, which is what a lot of people are, right? They run around and we're CEO and founder of this. I've been there before too. And I'm like, I'm the CEO of this thing that doesn't make me any money, costs me a ton of money, and is like a barely concealed series of disasters. And so I think people are waking up to it. I think the thing that is bigger for people is they don't realize, one, how much money you can make in small business compounded over time. And then they don't realize, two, that it's actually possible for them to buy a business that is big enough to cover their salary and have future potential. And so I think it is actually more fear than it is, I want to look a certain way. And what I'm trying to do is show people that you should always be a little scared of any new endeavor. That's how you know you're doing something right. But there's no way to get rich without the other four-letter word, which is risk. And so if we want to get rich, we have to do really two things. We have to move fast and we have to take risk. And then maybe you could say we have to iterate consistently, and then we have to work harder than we think we have to work. And if we add risk and speed together, and then we add iteration and relentless pursuit, we're harder to beat.
Yeah. I like that. And to your point about risk, again, like buying a boring, ordinary business is less risky, right? Because again, like the proof of concept already has been established. But you mentioned AI a moment ago, and I'm wondering, how do you envision technology in predicting, in impacting traditional Main Street businesses in the coming years? So are there tech solutions or trends you think we should be considered or concerned about, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things that are really important in buying businesses, and this would come in like the financing segment of the book, which is the real risk is how you buy the business. So it's like, what kind of debt do you overlay on top of the business? At what valuation? With what terms? If we could teach you how to do that intelligently, you can severely decrease your risk. You know, the SBA loan, which is the loan that the government will give you to buy a small business, they have a failure rate of anywhere from 5 to, at the height of 2020 COVID crisis, was about 23%. So that means somewhere between 5 and 23% of businesses fail. I think it's probably closer to 15 to 20% than it is 5. I bet a lot of those they're in something called workout, which is where the business still exists, but they're kind of parceling out the assets. So that still means we have somewhere between a 60 to 80% success rate. And, you know, in that case, that is a much better success rate than starting a brand new business. You know, most startups fail. So we've actually flipped the scale already. The statistics tell us instead of having a 90% fail rate, we will likely have somewhere between a 20 to 30% fail rate at the high end. So cool. One, we have some math that tells us this might be less, quote unquote, less risky from a failure perspective. But how can we decrease it even further? We need to be really thoughtful about how we buy it. So most small businesses, if they go sideways, it's because they took too much debt on a business and they couldn't service both what the business needs to continue to survive and the debt. So we got to really be thoughtful about how we buy these things. Devil's in the details. And then, and the last portion there, I think, is when we're looking at acquisitions in general, there's like really two main fears. One, I don't know how to do it. And two, I don't have the money to do it. And I think the important part about money that we go over in the financing section is really, you don't have a lack of money, you have a lack of knowledge. You know, private equity firms don't go and buy $100 million businesses with their own capital. They use creative financing structures. And so I want to try to teach people to do the exact same thing. And then what was your second question?
My second question was in regards to any tech solutions or trends that our audience should be aware of.
Yeah. One, I would say we do something called BRT. It's the strategy I teach, which is I call them boring businesses that have been around for a long time, that have something called the Lindy effect. Raise prices. Most small businesses are underpriced anywhere from 20 to 300%. In recession-resistant asset classes. And then the last portion is add technology. So, you know, part of my thesis at Contrarian Thinking Capital, our venture capital fund that invests in the infrastructure of small businesses, is most of these small businesses don't have any tech. So, you know, so when we have a laundromat, now that laundromat goes on to Sense, which is a laundromat platform that we now own part of. When we have an auto repair shop, that infrastructure tech goes on something called Shop Genie, which we also invested in. So that just allows the infrastructure of the business to be a lot easier. So the cool thing is, often these small businesses don't have a ton of tech, and so you adding that layer allows the business to be more profitable because you are more efficient.
Yeah, love it. Let's get back to Main Street Millionaire. I'm wondering if you can share one of your favorite stories from the book about someone who acquired a company. Maybe they're a little scared, but they took that risk, and things worked out well. If you don't mind sharing one of those anecdotes.
Yeah, I'll share both. I'll share one where it worked out well and one where it didn't, and we can see what we can learn from them.
Again, keeping it real, Codie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you know, the first one, her name's Jade, and Jade's a stud. She was in the government for quite some time, became a government contractor, had never thought about buying a business, like definitely not the target avatar for M&A. And what happened is when Jade came into our community and kind of learned our processes, she realized that the contracting firm she worked for actually had a perfect fit seller, which is what we call a seller who is likely going to sell in part of the baby boomer generation and is a good target. So she went and talked to the owner of the business that she worked for and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about, you know, selling this thing, or what are you going to do next?" And he was like, "Actually, you know, a few buyers reached out to me." And she was like, well, what do you think about me buying it instead? And we could use, seller financing, so you could help me with the future profits of the business to buy the business. We could have a transition period. I could pay you out with an annuity. Would you be open to something like that? And he was actually like, yeah, you've been an incredible employee. You're one of our top leaders of the fund. I'd much rather sell to you than do a 3-year earnout with some random person that I don't know who could severely F up my business and doesn't know the inside of it. And so Jade ended up buying that business using seller financing. That's a multi-million-dollar business a year. She had an unfair advantage because she knew that business too. So that's like the perfect way to do it. And then a bad way to do an acquisition is, I made up the name in the book because I didn't want to obviously share what the real name of the person was, but let's call the person Mary. And in this instance, Mary did everything I tell you not to do when she bought the business. So she bought a non-cash flowing business. It was not profitable. She bought a restaurant. Not good. She bought a business that was not located close to her, so she had to get on a flight every time she went to go to this business. She bought a business in an area she didn't have expertise in, and then with her subject matter expert that I always like somebody to bring on if they're going to do a small business acquisition, she gave him 50% equity without him putting in any capital, and on day one, invested on day one. And so when I saw the deal, I was like, Mary, what, she kind of reached out and said, hey, this is going sideways. The operator is actually not working at all. He said he was going to do all this stuff. He hasn't. Now the business is underwater. He's actually not turning it around. I don't even think he's working there anymore. Oh, and it was a failing franchise. So she also had another like 7 or 8% on top that she had to pay in franchise fees. So, that one didn't work out because she followed the opposite of our process, which is don't buy hopes and dreams, buy realities and profits today. And so you can see how two things could go pretty sideways and why.
Yeah. Reminds me of my kids. They just don't listen.
Yeah.
But I know we're coming up on time here, so let's ask you one final question. So your book, Main Street Millionaire, comes out in December of 2024. So I want you to imagine that you're in Brooklyn, where I live, in December 2025. You're walking down the street and someone says, I read your book. What transformation do you want them to have encountered during that time that you would be happy to hear about?
Yeah, well, funny story. The reason that I actually wrote this book at first, I didn't want to write a book, was my publisher, Helen, who works for Penguin Random House, was reaching out to me for like a few years. She's like, you should write a book. You should write a book. And I was like, Helen, I got other stuff going on. I don't have time for that right now. But thank you. Like, that's a huge honor. And then finally she reached out to me and she sent me a listing showing how she had used the stuff I talk about in our community to buy a business. And she did it while still working at Portfolio. And so it was really fun with working with her on the book because she's like, well, actually, I think we should do this. No. It made more sense to me like that. And so I actually kind of got to write the book with somebody who had taken my ideas and done it. And so that's what I hope is when I see somebody who's read the book, they go, man, I actually took this thing and I used these ideas to make more money. And it's not that like I want a nation of rich Lambo drivers. It's that I think that money is the key to freedom, and we are much harder to push around when we have capital and we are more free. And the last little soapbox I'll get on is increasingly we don't own things. In the US today, we're losing in ownership because even Canada's better at it than we are. They have 7.6% ownership of small businesses. We have 6%. So we have very rapidly gone from a nation of owners to a nation of renters in every sense of the word. And I think ownership equals freedom. And so what I hope is that people take this to get a little skin in the game, to buy a part of a business, to negotiate a little bit of upside in their business, to negotiate a little bit of upside in their job. Because if more of us do that, then we operate a lot less from fear because we realize we're much more capable than we think.
Codie, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy woman, so I'll let you go, but thank you for this. It is very much appreciated.
Terry, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.